computer. Hello, I'm Barlow Bradford, the director of the University of Utah Chamber Choir. We'd like to welcome you here to this performance of Tarik O'Regan's Triptych. Today on this call, we have some of the behind the scenes producers of this video, including the composer himself, Tarik O'Regan. We're thrilled to have you here. I'd just like to introduce who is on this call and what their role with this video has been. To begin with, as I just said, Tarik O'Regan, the composer, internationally known composer. We're just grateful that you could be here today. And thank you for your support behind us doing this crazy project. We really appreciate that.
Delighted to be here.
We have also John Hayward. John Hayward is the engineer behind the sound of this recording. Of course, as most of us are aware, choirs have had a very difficult time in the COVID world. Most choirs have been completely shut down. And John has figured out a way for choirs to continue singing, not necessarily together, but that the finished product sounds as if they were together. So every singer is singing in their own room somehow, and he takes literally, for this project, hundreds of files and puts them together and somehow turns it into a unified performance. It sounds like we're on the stage together. It's quite remarkable. So John Hayward, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We have Brandon LaBarge. Brandon LaBarge is a member of the chamber choir. He is a sophomore at the University of Utah. And the gods of COVID smiled upon us and brought us a film major into our choir this year. Of all years, this is the only time we've had a film major in our choir. And I'm so thrilled because he has taken on these projects for us. And he took on this particular project, which has been quite something, hasn't it, Brandon?
Yeah, it's been something. Yeah.
It's a big work. We have Alla Kopel, who just graduated with her master's degree in choral conducting at the University of Utah, and also Yufeng Wang, who graduated with his DMA, doctorate degree in music, choral conducting at the University of Utah just this week. And they, as my teaching assistants, have taken over the role of the initial recordings and all of the background work that has gone into having our choir be able to sing together, if you will, which we'll explain a little more in a bit. Thank you, Yufeng and Alla, for being here. We also have Alyssa King. Alyssa King is a sophomore at the University of Utah. She is She is majoring in modern dance, and she was asked out of the blue to come be part of this project, and she had never heard the choir. She had not heard this piece. And she said, well, let me listen. And she listened to the piece and she said, yes, I want to be part of this. And she choreographed her own dance to this music. And Brandon was filming with her, and we're looking forward to seeing how that comes together. Thank you, Alyssa, for being here. So I'd just like each of you to say a little bit about the process of putting this video together, creating this work. And as I said to Brandon, this art piece, which was what we were aiming for. But the very first thing I'd like to do is just ask Tarik about the text of this piece. I think it is crucial that our listeners understand what this text is about. And unlike most pieces that I have done in the choral world, this text is not by one author, but by many authors. And I'm interested, Tarik, as to why you did this. Why did you bring these various authors together? And how did you weave their text into a unified whole?
Well, it's great to be here, and that's a really good question. I think one of the odd things about being the composer is
excuse my dog.
You you think differently when you look back on the period in which he wrote the work and when you started collecting, when I started collecting these texts. So, you know, back when I wrote this, which is getting on for, I mean, 18 years ago, the entire work, Triptych, began really just as the first movement, which was called Threnody. And I suppose in Threnody, is the kernel for the whole piece, not just musically, but I think textually in terms of the attitude as well. And so Threnody was a one movement work. It was performed in its own right. It was commissioned by the Choir of London, who at that time were doing a lot of work in Israel and in Palestine, and working with singers in both those communities and bringing their own choirs over to that part of the world, and really trying to use music as a way to unify people who have at least historically been made to live at odds, you might say, and really try and understand some of the issues going on there. So, you know, I wrote a piece of music that I thought would be able to look at death in a way that was not so much about sort of slowness and not so much about repose, and not so much about being quiet and things like that. And it was, the idea of that was that I thought some of the most unifying things in life happen at the end of one's life, actually, the thoughts that one goes through. If you've ever been around people who've died or people who are in mourning. And I thought this was actually strangely, if I could do it rightly, could be a sort of curiously unifying way to think about the way that we live today and the way that our differences are ultimately unified when we're no longer around. And certainly from my background, my name is a mixture of two backgrounds. So certainly in the Tarik part that's from North Africa, my mother's family's from. Funerals are pretty loud events. There's a lot of singing, there's a lot of dancing. And in my mind, it's not that far away from the O'Regan side, which is the Irish side, if you go back a couple of generations. And certainly wakes that I've been to, Irish wakes, are full of music, full of lively music, full of discussion, full of talking. So really in that first movement, Threnody, I wanted to capture a sort of different way about thinking, a different way of thinking about what happens, when we're no longer alive, but in a way that is exciting and captivating. And that led me to look at lots of different texts. And I've always sort of kept notes of texts that I find interesting and snippets of things. And I sort of started seeing this thread that I could tie through these texts that make up the first movement. So William Penn, Muhammad Rajab al-Bayoumi, William Blake, and Psalm 133 from the King James version of the Bible. That really, really, I mean, it summed up in the first sentence: when death takes off the mask, we will know one another. Though diverse liveries we wear here make us strangers, which is by William Penn. And so, yeah, I felt that in that first movement, there could be this sort of journey from difference to unity. And I think what's interesting, looking back over the last 18 years, that I think is probably very crucial to think about with regard to this piece, and possibly why it gets performed a lot still, is a shifting in attitude to our embracing of difference. So back when I wrote this piece, the prevailing attitude very much was we're all the same. You know, prevailing attitudes towards how do we combat racism, how do we combat gender inequality, things like that. The attitude was we're all the same. There was a sort of colorblindness, the melting pot idea of multiculturalism, that fundamentally we're all the same. Now, I would say in the time between writing the piece and where we are now, there's actually been quite a change, which is in order to achieve some semblance of equity, we actually need to be aware of different experiences. In other words, people are different, and we need to look at those and celebrate those elements of diversity. And that is a greater sense of unity. Not that we're all the same fundamentally, but that if we achieve some greater sense of equity, then that is the greater unity. And what's strange is, I could sit here and say, well, I always thought that. That's what I was always thinking when I wrote this piece. That's what I was aiming for with the text that I put together, because it speaks to that equally now. But it's a really good example of what I began by saying, which is that texts and music over time can change in the interpretation of the performers and audiences and even the composer, which is that I think, interestingly now, looking at these texts, when I see the end of the first movement, behold how good and how pleasant it is for people to dwell together in unity, it doesn't mean, when I wrote the piece, I thought, yeah, we're all one big happy family. You know, it's going to be wonderful. But now I think of it, what I think of when I see unity and dwell together is actually striving for some sense of greater equity in the world. And this idea of strangers and the mask that we hide behind is actually really about, and what I think the first movement has come to mean to me, and in fact the whole piece, extrapolating from that, is really the piece now to me stands about embracing diversity over division. And that's what that's my own background, my own family, my own heritage, and where I see the piece having grown through who performs the piece and how it works today.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with what you're saying, and I love it. And I have to say that, interestingly, if we're talking about time and the 18 years since you wrote this piece, this last year has had a interesting twist when we say the word masks, and what those masks have done to society. I mean, as a necessary thing for us to help stop the spread of COVID, but there are side effects to that as well with society, and we're going to have to deal with those because we have isolated ourselves even further than what we might normally have done. And for us to, at least here in the United States right now, it seems that we're able to take off our masks a little more than we were over this last year. And it's quite a process to come to understand that. And I understand that this is not what this is talking about, but it is sort of a little microcosm experience, if you will, as to what that means. We're actually living what it means to take off a mask and to come back into a society.
I think it's one of the great things about music that you can put new interpretations on excellent works. And certainly, yes, the masks that have made us strangers, I'm sure you have, and I have experienced someone that runs a coffee shop down the road. I've only seen them wearing a mask, right, for a year or more. Right. And I saw that person in the street, and finally the mask was off. I didn't recognize them. So this idea that you can be made a stranger, right, is very intriguing to me. And so yes, again, I could say, well, I knew there was going to be a coronavirus in 2020. Well, I wrote the piece. So yes.
Well, it's a nice segue into how did we actually do this in the midst of coronavirus, when choirs have been discouraged from being together. And quite frankly, most choral singers don't want to be together in terms of nobody wanted to catch this virus. some choirs have gone ahead and they've socially distanced and they've been wearing masks, which is very difficult to do when you're singing. And socially distanced and choirs doesn't really work, because the whole point is you want to be able to hear each other and to create this music together. And you can't do that if you're 6 or 10 feet apart. It's very difficult to do. What we chose to do at the University of Utah is, in essence, create a recording studio. And we used 12 rooms, and we put microphones and video monitors, and each singer had his or her own set of headphones. All of these rooms were hardwired together, so we didn't have to deal with latency. We're using old technology, and then all of this was wired into my office at the University of Utah with monitors and microphones and my piano there, and we ran our rehearsals like this with 10 singers at a time. And that's how we ended up recording this piece. So each singer would be in their own room with their microphone. Now, we did have the advantage in this case that we could actually at least hear each other, at least 10 singers at a time, but we would record those 10 singers. And then after we had let the aerosols go away from these rooms, we'd have to wait a certain amount of time. Then the next group of 10 singers would come in, and we would have them listening to the first 10 singers and then singing along with those first 10 singers so that they could build their track of recording. And we just stacked these things over and over. And we ended up sending all of those files to John Hayward, all of these recordings. And in addition, this piece is not just for choir, but it is also for string orchestra. And we wanted to do it with string orchestra, but of course we couldn't actually do a performance or a rehearsal with this string orchestra. So what we did instead is we sent our string players MIDI files, and each string player played in his or her own home alone to this click track and to a MIDI file. At least for the first and third movements. The middle movement, which is a lot more rubato, I actually just played on the piano so that we could have the rubato in there and they would follow that. And we took all of those files from our string players and we sent those to John. And so John ended up with 200 plus recordings and is in the midst of putting this together and creating a piece that sounds like we're in the same room. John, do you want to talk about this for a moment?
You took all the explanation away from me. No, it's a really interesting process. I mean, stacking and this type of recording is not necessarily a new thing, although in the last 30 years, well, even in the last 5 to 10 years, technology has advanced so rapidly, and there are now much better tools to put these type of things together than there ever have been. And so one of the big pitfalls of taking all these remote recordings is, like you mentioned, making everyone sound like they're in the same space. Now, this is typically done with reverb and various other things, but there's a real fundamental understanding of how a group works and the dynamics of everyone getting together, how that fits and blends. Because when you have individual tracks like this, you have complete control over each individual singer. And so you have issues that you have to deal with, balances, blends, and things that you have to deal with that you never would have to worry about when everyone is singing together in a live room. So the process gets really interesting in terms of you have to have the technical know-how, and there are all these tools to help you, but you also have to be able to understand how this group is supposed to sound together in the first place so that you can space them, create a nice sonic profile. And then, of course, you have to unify all of these different intricacies, different microphones, different recording setups, computers, rooms, spaces. All of these introduce all of their own unique sounds and tones into the recording. And so then it becomes a process of, okay, well, how do I even that out and create sort of a unified spectrum for everything so they can all sonically sound like they're in the same space? So, with all the click tracks, with all the rubatos, with all of the different variables that we have to deal with, bringing that all together into one space can actually be incredibly intimidating and difficult at the same time. But ultimately, through a lot of trial and error, we've been doing this with Utah Chamber Artists for the past year. We've been doing this with Chamber Choir last semester. I feel like we've really come up with a system that seems to work for us.
And I think one of the reasons that John is so successful at this is because John was a voice major at the University of Utah. He graduated a few years ago. He sang in my choirs there and has been singing in Utah Chamber Artists since that time. And his own experience as a singer, as a performer, being in the midst of the choirs, being on the stage alone, I think that he really came to understand what this needed to be. And then he has a terrific ear, and he's able to recreate these just because he's experienced it himself. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
So Alla, what was it like to be ripped out of the conducting world and thrown into the engineering world, and to have every conceivable problem hitting us on a daily basis in these recordings?
Well, first, when I heard about what you were going to do, I was so excited. We're in the middle of the pandemic, not able to do anything. No one was singing together. And then, yeah, that was very exciting and thrilling. And then I get there and there are thousands, like I'm exaggerating, but it feels like thousands of wires going everywhere in every possible direction. So took a lot of Googling, a lot of figuring things out the first 2 weeks. Yufeng, that was really challenging. I had no idea what I was doing at all. So everything was breaking. So many different things to go wrong: microphones, headsets, wires, program, just everything. And with time, we figured it out, and it really was pretty successful. We still got a new problem to solve every single day, which made it really exciting. I don't think many people can say that about this year. I have a lot to look back to. I'm really glad I was part of it, and your piece was really meaningful to work as well.
Thank you, Alla. Yufeng, what do you think about it? I know we had a few problems. What kinds of problems drove you crazy this year, and how did we solve them?
Yeah, just like Anna said, at first it's kind of fun. Just we need to figure out how to deal this music technology stuff we have never done in my life before, and then like we need to, and also like the school's practice room, it doesn't set up as a recording studio, so we need to figure out how to put all the recording like microphone, to setting and connect to our control room. And also your office is not even close to our practice room, so it's also a lot of cable going, and just a lot of small things can be wrong. And then especially, and the computer need to handle so many microphone and need to handle 2 interface and 2 amplifier. Yeah, and also the school's computer just crashed a few times this week. So we just have no way. We just need to redo the recording again. Yeah, after we finish that and just, okay, we're ready to explore the music, but it crashed. And then we just, okay.
So frustrating.
Again. Yeah. So I think that's the most challenging part and most also frustrating part. But generally, it's really, really fun experience for me in my life. Yeah.
Thank you. I remember when we started this, when we started this process of rehearsing this way, it was a disaster. We spent most of our time dealing with the technology or the lack of technology, or what was going wrong, or what somehow wasn't plugged in exactly right here, and so the whole system was not working. And we would spend this time in rehearsal doing this, and it just drove me and I think everybody else crazy. And then when we finally did get to sing, it sounded horrible. I mean, this is a choir that is known for how good they are. And it just sounded awful. Nobody had any idea what it meant to actually sing into a mic and listen through a headset and to try and blend with your neighbor that was not in the same room. It was unbelievable. And we actually learned how to do that over the years. So we, in addition to the sound of this thing, we wanted to have a video, which has been a major part of this experiment, if you will, so that we have sound and video coming together. And because Brandon came into the choir, I went to him and said, Brandon, what do you think about doing this? This is an 18-minute piece. This is an extended choral piece. It's with string orchestra and choir. It's very enlightening texts that need to be brought forward. Do you think you could come up with an art piece? And he said yes. And that was it. So as a sophomore at the film, or in the film department there at the university, he took on a project like this and he created this on his own. It was his. And Brandon, tell us about it.
Yeah, so you came to me first and mentioned that you wanted me to make an art piece, and that made me really excited, because that's, you know, that's something that even, you know, as a film major, sometimes I don't really get the opportunity to make something that's just kind of my vision of, you know, the art. The first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned that was kind of like minimalist imagery and minimalist portraits and paintings. And so I kind of wanted to replicate that with the footage that I used in the video. But I think what I most wanted to capture with, you know, with how I made this video was each of these movements has such a beautifully diverse color and mood and energy and, you know, overall meaning towards what the piece is talking about. And so I tried to make each movement have its own, you know, its own flow, its own style, you know, its own meaning towards the video, like the music does. So that's kind of what I went through putting this together. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of coordination with the choir, trying to get people out, you know, trying to keep groups of 30 people organized and, you know, on schedule and shooting. It was a lot of work and coordination, but it was a blast too.
And the entire piece is your own filming. You're not taking clips from someplace else or still pictures from someplace. This is all you're doing, right?
Yeah, it's all original footage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is difficult. You're not kidding. It's difficult. One of the interesting things in this piece is that there are complete sections that are meditative, if you will, of just the strings playing, or there are times when we thought, okay, we don't want to have the choir necessarily just be there singing on the video all the time. We wanted all sorts of things happening, and we thought it would be wonderful to add one more element to this video, and that would be to have a dancer as part of the video. And we asked Alyssa if she would do this. She, as I mentioned, choreographed this on her own. And Alyssa, can you tell us what it is that struck you about this piece and what the resulting choreography was as a result of what the music inspired in you?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't like to take all the credit. I like to say that we created this together, because a lot of my inspiration was derived from the music and from Brandon and all the ideas that were given to me. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I did this myself. But I have to say that the very first thing I did was listen to the music all the way through. And I realized that I was getting all of these different reactions in my brain from this piece. You know, this beauty and this amazing, joyous feeling I got, and then also the sorrow and the feeling of the words as well. And I realized, oh my goodness, I need to write this down. So basically, after I listened to this whole piece, I wrote down words that described it. And I came up with words like triumphant and joyous, but I also came up with words like soft and beautiful. And I was able to create movement phrases based off of these words and based off of the words Brandon has given me as well.
Well, it's very exciting. And as music director, I should know all of these things and what's happening in this, but I have yet to even see any of the footage that Alyssa has done. And I'm so excited to see what's happening. This is truly, as Alyssa said, a collaborative effort in a lot of different places. And it's kind of like throwing a bunch of balls in the air and hoping they come down and create some beautiful thing on the ground. And that's what we've done. I want to thank all of you for being here, but as a final question for Tarik, this piece has been very, very popular. Would you say this is one of your more popular works?
Yeah, I think with pieces like this that I know it's the most popular piece because I can see the breakdown from my publisher every 3 months or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of pieces like this, which are sort of extended and require hiring the instrumental parts, so we get a record of it. Yeah, it is done. It's done a lot everywhere. Yeah, I didn't know it would do that.
Right. What is the magic of this piece? Why do so many people do it?
You know, it's so funny because when I hear pieces that are done a lot, in my head I was like, oh, I wish I could change that. I wish I could change that. But I think it's nice to hear all this, you know, talk of collaboration, because I think what happens is, you know, the piece becomes yours. It really does. It becomes everyone on this call, everyone performing the piece, everyone who hears it. And that's why I don't ultimately go back, you know, back into the score and change it, because at some point who am I? You know, I don't know better than other people that are doing it. I think there are some really basic things that I was interested in at the time that I think have become, you know, more commonplace, or not more necessarily more commonplace, but have over time created an area of interest. One of them is, and I think, you know, everyone on this call has spoken about this, I think is that it is fast and rhythmic and for the voice. And that combination of fast vocal music now is still not as common as I'd like it. And certainly when I was writing this 18 years ago, it was very, very uncommon. There was a period where a lot of people were really looking into slowing down choral music, really embracing very resonant acoustics with long echoes, really getting into enjoying that sort of way that the voice can evolve in a slow space. And that really was an amazing time. That was the not rediscovery, I hate the term rediscovery, but a lot of people started getting into Baltic composers that were hitherto certainly not known in the UK particularly, and I don't think in the US either. And there was a real sense of engaging with the voice in this very a cappella slow way, and it yielded a lot of wonderful music, but that became the dominant sound. You couldn't move for this very, very slow way of singing and performing, and pieces were in that vein. And if you wanted to hear fast music, you know, you'd have to go back a couple of 100 years to you know, Baroque stuff with all the fast string writing and sort of quite direct vocal stuff. So there was I was just interested in capturing that simply because I wasn't hearing that much of it. Mm-hmm. And I think people were interested in that then, and that has become much more common now. I think people are beginning to really think of choral music as being possibly able to be fast moving and really invigorating type of music. And obviously the second movement is very much in that sort of slow world of what was going on back then, but it's framed by these two very fast movements. And I think the other aspect of it that, again, you know, hearing everyone on this call and what you were saying, Alyssa, about contradictory feelings and the music evoking different responses that seem at odds with one another. I think we are beginning to understand that the world is messy and answers are not neat, And when something looks very neat, it's probably suspicious. And I think there's something in the piece that is nuanced and contradictory and complicated in the texts and the way that the texts interrelate. And I think when I look at the text now, and again, this is looking at them afresh, there is a complexity and nuance and messiness, in a sense, to the texts that contradict each other at places, that I think is very much in tune with what we're striving for now. And I don't know whether it's a general retaliation that we feel towards the sort of neatness of social media, for example, where one must like something or love something, and in order to not like it, you have to create an alternate opposite in order to like or dislike it. So I think there's some nuance in there that I think speaks to the way, or certainly speaks to the way that I hear people talk about what's missing in certainly in conversation these days, whether it's saw a lot of it with the discussion around politics, for example. It's very hard I find it very hard to have these nuanced conversations. So I feel very drawn towards it. So I think a couple of those things in the piece have sort of stood the test of time. And I honestly, it's odd. Like I feel, I did write the piece, and so I know I wrote it, but it's very odd looking back on something that has taken on, in many ways, a life of its own. And going back to the theme of collaboration, a lot of that, if not most of it, most of the success in the piece has been interpreters like you, all of you, making the piece live, because music as written on the page is really just that. It's just markings on a page. And there is always some magic that makes two performances of an identical score slightly different. And that is the magic that everyone on this call has and creates. And it's the magic that you're creating and the relationship that you're having with your audiences and your community that makes this piece live. And in a sense, my work was done 18 years ago. So it is my honor to be here and to witness your magic. So I'm very, very grateful to you and for people like you for making this piece work. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you who have been behind the magic of this. Magic is just a lot of hard work usually, and you just hope for something that sparks and works in the end. So thank you, and we hope you enjoy this video.